All right, thank you everybody. So great to be here. I have to say that yesterday I landed, I'm from Washington DC area within the US. So yesterday I landed around 5:30 p.m. and encountered some traffic, but I'm glad that I didn't miss the Montreal Canadiens. I went to watch the game. It was a great game, even though Montreal lost. It's my first time here in Montreal, so I have to experience that. Right, the original team. Huge hockey fan, but I can't really skate. Um, so my name is David Chow. I'm the Chief Technology Strategy Officer at Chow Micro. And prior to joining Chow Micro, I spent 20 years in US government. And within US government, I started as an intern, worked myself up to Deputy CIO, CISO, as well as eventually become the CIO for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which I'll get into a little bit in terms of my use case on Zero Trust. I also worked for the president, worked for President Bush, President Obama directly inside the White House. I also had quite a bit of engagement working with President Trump. I left when Biden took over and then basically started working in the private industry. So quite a bit, as you can see, that quite a bit of experience in the government area, but I also worked for financial sectors. After I left government, I went to financial sector before coming over to Chow Micro. So it's very good to be here. Today I want to talk to you about Zero Trust. Really one second. Okay, so want to share with you my journey through the Zero Trust, comparing against US government, what the US government is pushing, as well as some of the sound recommendation from more of a practical standpoint. But before we get into that, I want to share about my journey currently, in my current role. So I'm the Chief Technology Strategy Officer. What I do is I basically travel around. I go to different places, talk to a number of C-levels, talk to IT practitioners such as yourself. Not only be an evangelist, but really talk about my past experience and how I look at cybersecurity from my past experience, and then sharing globally, right? I traveled to Australia, Singapore. I just came back from a trip to India as well as Singapore, and really talk about not only Zero Trust, but the overall global trend, which I will share in a minute. So cybersecurity has come along quite a bit, right? So in the past years, it's really compliance driven. There's lack of roadmap, lack of focus, but really more working in silos. People are focusing on, addressing the audit needs, addressing, for example, you work in financial institution, you get annual audits, not only by government, but also by a third-party entity because it's required, right? So a lot of it is just focusing on addressing the compliance. But then at the same time that there has been a lot of technical debt within the IT environment, so there's a lot of security is hugely inefficient simply because application development has been hugely inefficient. And I'll share my experience working at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. There has been disjointed cybersecurity capabilities. So for one, that when I was working as a CIO, we're trying to put in place SOC, we're trying to put in place NOC, we're trying to put in place overall visibility where that can actually help me to see what's going on within my IT environment, my biggest risk, right? But then the issue that I was facing back in 2018 was that I tried to put in all that, but I'm not able to leverage one type of technology or one technology that's piecing all the stuff together, a platform technology that can actually allow me to see through the single pane of glass, not only controlling my environment, but also having the necessary understanding of what's going on from the risk standpoint, and then be able to take actions. And then lack of maturity in cybersecurity in terms of framework. Just, there's quite a bit of information out there. This is in the past, right? But what we see right now is that, especially for the past 3 years, the landscape is entirely different. So for one, that we know that it's not compliance driven anymore. We know that the board is actually focusing on cybersecurity because we see on the news that there's quite a bit of ransomware incidents, cybersecurity incidents, that's actually causing companies to lose money. So for example, there's an Australian telecommunication company. They had a privacy data breach. Overnight, for 7 million users, overnight the stock plummeted 20%. and then subsequently that it went down 20% more. So just through that, people see quite a bit, people hear, and then Colonial Pipeline ransomware within the US. So because of the ransomware, it's actually impacting people's daily lives. So when I was actually working out on the West Coast, I was walking around, I saw people trying to get gas, right? So they're lining up, 1 mile out simply because they're afraid that they're not being able to get gasoline because of the pipeline ransomware. So we're seeing that it's not only impacting the overall board, the share prices, but it's also impacting the daily lives of all the citizens. That's why government is starting to focus more on regulation, oversight, as well as pushing, for example, US is pushing the zero trust for all government agencies, which I'll talk about. So cybersecurity risk management framework, right? So in the past, there was only NIST framework, but now there's the MITRE ATT&CK framework. There's also the zero trust architecture. To me, it's a framework. So it's a framework. And then at the same time that there's more understanding, more conversation about it. But if you really look at it, the bottom line is risk management, right? It's the risk management for enterprise, but then focusing on the cybersecurity area. Digital transformation, so that's critical because in order to have, especially if you're trying to meet the zero trust objectives, your identity access is actually critical. So how do you actually secure to make sure that your legacy application is actually on par so that you can apply your architecture, security architecture related to identity access management, as well as the overall data control. So that's actually a critical point for people to focus on. XDR, so I talk about the single pane of glass. So I see that security solution has matured quite a bit. So for one, that people are finding ways, enterprises, industries are finding ways to bring information together, telemetry information from point solutions into a platform solution so that not only that you can control through single pane of glass or single platform, but also having the visibility within that single pane of glass and then be able to take action, document so that you can provide information to your auditors, but then knowing exactly at all times your risk exposure within the environment. And then lastly, cloud security. So cloud security, has been rampant usage of cloud adoption. Cloud adoption it's huge within the US, but globally as well. So this is something that has taken off quite a bit in terms of focusing on how do you containerize, how do you ensure the proper security within your cloud environment. So I want to share about just my global journey and what we talked about from global sense before I dive into the zero trust. So for one, that obviously zero trust architecture, a buzzword of 2022. Everybody's talking about it. Vendors, industry, vendor, we love it because we use that in a way to sell more products, create more revenues, right? It's not just our company, all the companies, they do that. But then at the same time that it's actually elevating the conversation of cybersecurity to daily lives, right? So you could have your board member asking, hey, I saw President Biden push out executive order in 2022, and then it's actually talking about zero trust. Can you explain to me what's zero trust? Or you could be facing, just in daily conversation, should we really embark on zero trust? Or is this something that we need to start trusting from the beginning and then start maturing from the zero trust architecture standpoint? So it actually generate a lot of conversation and also helping the C-levels, the CIO, the CISOs, to be able to articulate the importance of cybersecurity. And that was actually my experience when I was working as a CIO for Department of Housing of Urban Development. Cyber risk resilience, so we talk about quite a bit into the risk management aspect. So this is where we have redundancy. We want to ensure that we have the risk of exposure, a measurement, but then also ways that we're documented our approach of addressing those risks. Board level conversation, we talk about that in terms of impacting the share prices, impacting the board. So recruitment and retention. So there has been a study done. There's currently 2.1 million of workforce shortage on cybersecurity personnel. So this is just going to continue on, and this is prompting that the need of automation, the need for tools, capability, technologies to actually help reduce some of the churns on the workforce. Data classification, the privacy data, I talk about the data breach, right? The 7 million data breach in Australia. So it's actually one of the hottest topics in Australia. So last October, for 6 weeks in a row, each of the 6 weeks, there was a major data breach, privacy data breach, which led to Australian government to really focus on putting a lot of policy in place as well as penalizing companies that does not do a good job in terms of securing their information. And then discipline of DevSecOps, right? As we embark on more of a risk management approach as well as the enhancement in technology. So bringing security to the forefront when you're actually going through application development, it's actually critical rather than waiting until the very end. This will actually help you expedite your application development process, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Attack surface risk management. So risk management is one aspect, but then understanding your boundary, right? All the risks within your IT environment and how you're able to address each of the areas, right? From identity to your application network, as well as your data. Those are huge focus, ensure that you have your attack surface areas actually having the necessary visibility so that you're able to manage that. Artificial intelligence, hottest word in 2023, right? So even cybersecurity vendors talking about, oh, we're using artificial intelligence to automate, to ensure that it's creating efficiency, which is true, right? I mean, in a way that you can think of it as a way to sell, but it's also at the same time that leveraging technology to actually help accelerate or at least addressing some of the efficiency issues. But then at the same time that, how do you actually put the guardrail in artificial intelligence to ensure that there's actually proper leverage of information and then this still safeguarding your privacy data, your information through the artificial intelligence endorsements. So that's something that we've been talking about quite a bit globally. And lastly, I mean, everybody knows that it has been quite a bit of, surprisingly, right, 2022 and 2023, we thought that, we're in the era that there's not gonna be any wars, but after, coming off COVID, there's more of isolationism rather than continue the globalization. And then at the same time that the China and US trade war is prompting a lot of tensions so that you're getting into more and more of this geopolitical risk and how that's actually impacting each countries, right? So it's impacting US. I'm not sure about Canada, but it's definitely impacting a lot of different regions globally. And that's something that we actually talk about as I travel around the globe. So let me get into the US government zero trust journey in terms of what President Biden has mandated. So essentially that zero trust is, always never trust, always verify. You don't trust anybody. You have to verify all the information that's coming in. So President Biden pushed out this executive order March of 2022, so last March. And then in it, it's requiring essentially that each agency, for all the government agencies, there's 436 government agencies, each agency needs to be able to designate a zero trust official, and then creating the plan as well as the budget request within 2 to 6 months duration, submitted to the White House, and then essentially for the White House to obtain the budget, right? So the president was able to obtain the budget out of the budget cycle. So in the US, typically it takes 2 years to obtain the budget through Congress. But he was able to accelerate that using his executive power. So he was able to get the authority, $11 billion in January of 2023. So there are, as I indicated, 436 government agencies, large and small. You could have Army that have 1 million users, right, civilian as well as military. Or you could have a small, tiny organization that probably only has 400 users. So across the board, right? So, but at the same time that the zero trust has been leveraged as a way for the administrations to really focus on what has happened in the past years, right? So we had the colonial ransomware. We see a lot of ransomware, especially when you see it on the news. The citizens gets there's apprehension, right? You don't understand what's cybersecurity, what's ransomware, why is it impacting me? Why am I having a hard time getting gas? Or why is somehow that my bank account is locked up because I've fallen into some sort of a wire fraud or some sort of fraudulent activities. So this is, people are a little scared. People are a little afraid, especially seeing this on a daily basis in the news. And then at the same time that we see the war going on with Russia and Ukraine, even before the war, it was really focusing on the cyber attacks, right, from Russia to Ukraine. So because of it, the Zero Trust came about. The Zero Trust executive order came about. It's really helping to ease the mind of the citizens to be able to move forward. So many government CIO CISOs, I mean, they're a little skeptical because, I mean, for one, that they're asking, is it really necessary? You don't understand my environment, but then you're saying that I need to implement Zero Trust by 2024, September of 2024. Is it possible? Probably not. Is it expensive? Yes. Is it something that necessary? That's debatable, right? Depends on the mission, depends on the agency objectives. And then lastly, the Department of Army, essentially because of the size of their organization, they're saying that they will not be able to meet the timeline, but they do have a plan to meet Zero Trust, and their plan is 2026, not 2024. So my personal journey, right? I want to share my personal journey and then share my perspective of what's going on within the US, whether this truly can be implemented, and then as well as providing some recommendations. So I was the CIO for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Very quickly about this organization, this agency, it's a government agency, provide a lot of social welfare, but also subsidies for housing, low income, even homelessness that we actually provide support. So the organization is about 8,500 people, employees across the board within the US. And then the annual budget is $63 billion. And at the same time that the most notable program is the $1.3 trillion of mortgage portfolio. It's a government subsidized mortgage portfolio. So typically that you pay in, anybody pay in 20% down payment to get a house, to get a loan, to secure a loan. But under this program, you just pay in 3.5%. Obviously, this is to help low-income families, especially for Americans that we don't really save. According to our GDP, we're not big savers. So this is actually a good way to help individuals to be able to qualify and able to actually, realize their dream of owning a home. So I was a CIO. Essentially, you guys work in IT. As a CIO, you handle all the IT capabilities, including cybersecurity, including application development, help desk, anything you can just IT related. It was me, right? So I have 400 million budget, and essentially that I have about 1,000 employees reporting to me. So why is it critical to push out Zero Trust? I started my job August 20th of 2018. Very quickly, when I start asking around people, I start seeing a huge issue, right, within cybersecurity of this organization. For one, that yes, I mean there's organizationally there's an issue in terms of legacy debt. There's 186 applications. Each one is built differently, different architecture. We have Oracle, SQL. We have PeopleSoft. We have Java, C++, C#. Anything you can name in terms of technology, we have, right? Even Cold Fusion. A lot of cybersecurity risks. So very quickly, and when I asked, do we have SOC, do we have NOC, do we have Splunk, how are we aggregating our data? How do I create a visibility within my environment, IT environment? Because within US government, the CIO is responsible for IT security. Yes, there's a CISO, but if something goes wrong, Congress will actually blame and ask what's going on with the CIO. So I know very quickly it could be a career limiting factor for me that if I do not address this organization in terms of cybersecurity, if something happens, I could be on the news, right? Me personally could be on the news, being grilled by the Congress, and essentially that I could be potentially unmarketable in my future jobs. So very selfishly, but that's honestly, that's very true. It's how much that this organization has neglected cybersecurity. So it's on focus. There hasn't been really much of focus on cybersecurity. When I ask around, how do you send out information to validate that the social security number, the privacy data for average users, right? So they're telling me that they just send out plain emails. They send out plain emails. They don't even go through encryptions. And I have no way of knowing what's going on, whether somebody actually sent something out. There's not a DLP. There's not data loss prevention. There's not a tracking for me to actually know what's going on. And that's the mindset. They say that they've been doing that for the past 30 years. So who am I to change that? So the mindset is just not there to focus on cybersecurity. Organization is underfunded, so organizations spend about 5% of its annual budget, right? So 400 million, 5% of that, 2 million that's the annual budget on cybersecurity. As opposed to typical organization, a study has been done by Gartner that in U.S. government, they spend about 12%, 12 to 15%. So I know very quickly that consistently for the years in the past, this organization has underspent on cybersecurity. So how can you mature your overall environment? And then also it's neglected. So we get even though we're somewhat of a regulator in the government agency, we also get regulated by auditors, right? So you have a third-party auditor ask us, basically go through on an annual basis, going through penetration tests, going through the annual FISMA audit, going through the financial statement audit, and then essentially that I ask, how many outstanding audit findings do we have? Cricket. Nobody answered anything, right? So essentially, they don't know. I don't know. I didn't know. I just started the job for a week, and then they couldn't answer anything. So very quickly, that I know that it's been neglected because typically that if there's audit findings, if there's people assigned to be accountable for those audit findings, at the very least that we're working on something to mature the environment. So what happened was that why is it critical to push out zero trust? I can list out all this, right? But the bottom line is, for me, I need to change the mindset. I need to change the mindset of my staff, of my organization, my enterprise, of my agency head, as well as just how people are perceiving this department. Why are we not focusing cybersecurity for the past 20 years? Why are we just sending out privacy information, social security number, without having a way to validate or track that they're actually doing what they're supposed to do? So because of all that, honestly, at that time, Zero Trust was a marketing campaign for me. I need to use that to be able to start changing the mindset, the awareness, the people and process side, the culture aspect. But then obviously there's a lot of more details that we actually put in as a way to change people's mindset as well as enhancing the overall environment. So this was the roadmap that we actually built working with Deloitte, right? So we went in there, we went through the assessment, understanding what are some of the issues that we're encountering in terms of cybersecurity, and we start laying out the foundations, right? We're looking at people, process, technology, but the most critical part is to have a 24/7, 365 SOC. Once I have the SOC, I know what's going on within my environment. At the very least, I know issues. Then how do I actually enforce those process and practice those process to be able to ensure that I'm addressing those issues as well as additional capability I want to put in place. So one of the areas, right, we talk about DLP, data loss prevention. That was actually one of the areas that we push out very hard. We had to negotiate with union because in the past it was never done. So we had to go through that political aspect to be able to get the buy-in. But then in a way that we're actually able to track everything that has happened, even when somebody mistakenly sent out social security number or purposely sent that out. We have a way of tracking it. We have our SOC to go through investigation for those individual who actually does that. And then at the same time, that there's identity access management, there's data classification, there's auto remediation, some of the process improvements as well as technology improvements. We also enforce that as part of the roadmap. And this was actually shared with Congress to obtain funding, right? So essentially, the Congress they're my board members. I had to appease them in order to make sure that I'm able to obtain the necessary funding to move forward. So very quickly, lessons learned, right? So really I talk about people, process, and technology. So people and process to me is actually the hardest part to change. Technology, it takes time to address issues, especially when you have legacy debt over, but then that there are actually mitigation way to address that. But the people and process side, to change people's mindset, it's just hugely critical, but then it's also not as easy as thought. So let me apply that to the US government Zero Trust. So what kind of challenges that they're facing? So for one, on people side, right? So if my agency is going through the process that people have the complacency, the mindset, it goes across the board in the US government. It's not just my agency, it's across the board in the US government. And also at the same time that there's still that 2.1 million workforce shortage. It doesn't change the fact that you're implementing zero trust. So that is going on, right? The process side. So a lot of the issues that we face is not having the sanitized environment, not having the necessary hygiene within the environment from the process aspect. So it's not just applied to my organization, but also to across the board to all the government agencies. Legacy technology, I have 186 applications. Imagine Homeland Security, imagine Army, DoD, how many legacy applications that they have. And then government bureaucracy, right? So I talked about it takes 2 years to obtain funding, and then it takes, so let's say if we got the funding, President Biden was able to get the funding in January, it takes 12 months to 18 months to complete a procurement lifecycle. So you're talking about for $10 million procurement in average. So let's say 12 months. So it's going to be complete by January of next year, 2024. The objective is to complete by September 2024, so which leaves 8 months to complete the overall work for this massive organization. To me, it's unlikely. And actually, to me, it's not going to be possible. And lastly, there's an external factor, right? It's too expensive? Is it critical? Without having the analysis done within the organization, is it really necessary? And lastly, that there's also the U.S. president election. What if it happens that Republican wins the election next year, and looking at this as part like the Obamacare, right? This is the President Biden legacy. Would this be killed by the Republican president? Very likely. So this is like another factor that people have to consider. So what's my recommendation, right? We talk about all this, and I just want to share that, yes, from practical standpoint, I talk about the 186 applications. I'm just going to blow this up and just having a conversation. The issue is that if you were to go through this 5-pillar approach dictated by President Biden, I used to do that. I did it, right? But you had to go through analysis of your identity and then leading into all the way to your data, right? Identity, devices, network, and workload, your application, as well as data. Because identity is the front door for how people are accessing information. But think about, you have to create this massive spreadsheet and then go through all your applications, 186 applications, and then go through your analysis. And before you actually finish that analysis, then you start working. But I think maybe there's a more efficient way of going about it, which is probably work from right to left. You go through your data, go through data classification. You all know what are the critical data that you have within your environment. Within 3-5 minutes, you can answer me right now. And just start focusing on that, work backward. What are some of the systems that's associated with that data set, as well as devices, how the network is accessing, and then the identity, who have the right to access that information. What's the identity access management? So you can probably finish that within those 3 or 5 critical set of data that you have and start achieving zero trust rather than waiting until the very end, analysis of 186 applications. You can actually know very quickly the top tier, the top critical application you need to do. So essentially that you're saving time, you're providing value, you're also showing to your board, showing to your agency head that you're creating efficiency as well as securing the overall environment. Whether there's going to be zero trust or not next year, right? You're actually doing what you're supposed to do, which is risk management, which is secure your overall environment. I want to introduce this concept, security first. Essentially that this is where the bottom line is that you focus on what works for you. You bring the security to the forefront. Let me blow this up since you're taking pictures. So essentially that you want to create security mindset for the entire organization. You want to bring that security to the conversation in the forefront. This is not just when you're developing an application, right? So when you develop application, you can actually use those, reuse some of the identity access management areas. But then this is also focusing on some non-IT related activities. For example, like your personnel onboarding. So your personnel onboarding will touch upon the IT part. But if you bring your IT people, security people to the forefront of that conversation, this can actually help reduce that churn down the road and then not being able to understand some of the security concept or concerns that you'll have in the future. So this is the zero trust 5 pillars, right? So one other part I want to mention at the very bottom is actually using automation to create that efficiency. And that's sorely needed because we know the 2.1 million workforce that's currently needed to ensure that any environment is properly secure. So my takeaway very quickly. So one is that obviously zero trust, leveraging zero trust, but don't blindly follow what vendor is selling you. Yes, I'm a vendor, I'm selling to you, but I want you to understand that the zero trust should work to your environment based on your understanding, based on your risk appetite, risk portfolio. And it's a framework, right? You apply the solution, yes, to create that automation, but then the bottom line is that it's your environment. The second part is that risk management. It goes back to the risk management concept. That's the bottom line, right? Cybersecurity is a risk management. How do you prioritize your risk? You need to have the visibility within your environment, knowing the boundary, prioritize it, and then address the critical risks, and then you start moving downward. And lastly, leveraging the automation tools that you can actually procure to create that efficiency for yourself. So I want to thank you, but before I get off, I have a tradition which I like to take a Wi-Fi for whenever I travel. So say cheese. All right, thank you.